Good morning. Can I welcome Assembly members and members of the public, both here and watching on webcast, to today's meeting of the Police and Crime Committee. Our main item of business today is a question and answer session with MOPAC, the Mayor's Office in Police and Crime, and the Metropolitan Police Service. But first, we have a few short items of formal business to go through before we begin this discussion. Members of the public may like to follow us on Twitter at London Assembly and take part in the meeting discussion using hashtag #AssemblyPolice. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any unnecessary interruptions this morning. First item of the agenda, apologies for absence. And so can I ask the clerk, Teresa Young, if any apologies have been received for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Assembly Member Duval, and Assembly Member Arnold will be substituting for him today.
Thank you. No announcements from me. Item 2, declarations of interest. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2? Thank you. And can I ask Assembly members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interest and other relevant interests, including any declarations in relation to gifts and hospitality, which are not reflected on the authority's register of gifts and hospitality, where they relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting? Great. No declarations. Minutes. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting of the PCC, Police and Crime Committee, held on 4th September and 19th September, to be signed by me as correct records?
Yep.
Thank you. List of actions. Can I ask the committee to note the completed, ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee as listed in the report?
Great.
Thank you. Action taken on delegated authority. Can I ask the committee to note the recent action taken by me and the delegated authority, and can we note our report on hate crime? Noted. Thank you.
Noted.
So we now move to our main item of business, which is a monthly question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Police and Crime and the Metropolitan Police Service. And I would like to welcome our guests, Sophie Linden, Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime, and Sir Stephen Howes, Deputy Commissioner, Metropolitan Police Service. Before we move to the questions, I'm going to ask both of you, starting with you with Sir Howes. We would invite you to make the three opening statements we'd like you to make. The first opening statement is on, if you could just generally comment on the policing operation around Extinction Rebellion and the London-wide, in particular the London-wide Section 14 notice served last night. So Sir Howes, if I could ask you to...
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the opportunity to do so. So as members will know, Extinction Rebellion protests started in London really on Sunday night. I think we're probably into day 10, although there was the fire engine prank outside Treasury on the previous Thursday, I think. So we're now into day 10 of this demonstration. We are 1,400 arrests and climbing. We have so far cleared protesters who were camped or locked on illegally in locations St James's Park, Horse Guards Road, Trafalgar Square, Whitehall, Marsham Street, Lambeth Bridge, Westminster Bridge, Horsefree Road, London City Airport, Bank, Euston Road, New Scotland Yard and BBC at Portland Place. So we have been gradually trying to clear London streets so that London could go about its business. The last situation we had most recently was an encampment in Trafalgar Square and an encampment which is still in place within Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens in Lambeth. Last night we issued a Section 14 of the Public Order Act notice specifically, and I have to be very clear on this, the wording of it is specific, that says this is to do with Extinction Rebellion, Autumn Rebellion or Autumn Uprising, which is their terminology for the demonstration, saying that they now had to cease this demonstration across London. What we are not saying is that people cannot demonstrate across London, and indeed today there will be a number of demonstrations across London on a variety of different things that we will police as we normally do. We're also not saying to Extinction Rebellion or any other group that you cannot protest on climate change, which is clearly a massive issue of public concern. And we are not even saying to Extinction Rebellion, you cannot protest again in future. What we are saying is, in relation to this demonstration, it must now cease. It's been going on for 10 days. As I say, we've arrested over 1,400 people. Last time this happened in London, it cost the Metropolitan Police over £16 million. It will be more this time, we believe, because it's gone on a bit longer and we've used more mutual aid. We are disrupting BCU activity. We are pulling hundreds of officers a day away from the 12 territorial BCUs in London, putting huge strain on our officers. I spoke to some officers on mutual aid last night on Lambeth Bridge who've been working 18 hours that day. We simply cannot allow this to continue when the demonstration is illegal, which it is. So we have made moves to curtail the demonstration. Trafalgar Square is now closed to the demonstration and is cleared of the demonstration. We have continually, and members will see police officers on the streets dressed with blue tabards. These are protest liaison officers, and we continually try to reach out to Extinction Rebellion to try and agree with them a lawful protest that they can continue with. They have not engaged with that so far. I would repeat again this morning, if Extinction Rebellion wish to get in touch with us and talk about mounting lawful demonstrations, we will very happily engage with them. But what we can't do is continue...
Oh, sorry.
Meeting in public, public meeting.
What we cannot continue to do is to police an unlawful demonstration. I accept that 99.9% has been perfectly peaceful, possibly even more than that. But that is not to say that it is lawful. It is an unlawful demonstration, and it has to cease now. That's where we are.
Thank you for those comments, Sir House. Deputy Mayor, do you have anything to add to what Sir House has said?
I think the Deputy Commissioner has been very clear around the complexity and the burden that the protests and the demonstrations have placed on the Metropolitan Police over the last 8, 9, 10 days. This is a really complicated matter. The Mayor is really clear that we are in a position of climate emergency and we need to take this incredibly seriously, and we respect and support the right to lawful and peaceful protest. Really clear about that, and we are also respect the right of the Metropolitan Police to take operational decisions to keep London moving and to keep London safe and the community protected.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions from committee members? Sylvia Berry.
Thank you very much, Chair. So yeah, you've outlined your reasons for imposing Section 14 order over the entire city and the City of London area as well. Was this proportionate to an immediate risk from these protests? And why was it put on at 9 p.m. at very short notice?
The short answer to you is it proportionate? Yes, it is. I think I've outlined why it's proportionate. So we believe it is proportionate. Why was it put on at 9 o'clock at night? It was put on following lengthy discussions within the Metropolitan Police and with partners around it. We had actually spoken to Extinction Rebellion, I think over the previous 48 hours, to say, look, we need to clear Trafalgar Square. And a good number did clear Trafalgar Square and went to the Pleasure Gardens in Vauxhall, which we acknowledged they did that, and Lambeth Council were accepting of that for a while. But we also made it clear to Extinction Rebellion, as I say, through our protest liaison, that we expected Trafalgar Square to be cleared. And that's why we went ahead and cleared it and issued the order. 9 o'clock at night, we weren't, I don't think we were being unreasonable, because we were talking to them for 48 hours beforehand saying, look, this needs to be clear. We can't block Trafalgar Square any longer. And they knew that.
So you described the demonstration as illegal, and you've also said that at Trafalgar Square people were illegally locked on. But for days running up to this, police officers have been saying to protesters, in order to protest legally, go to Trafalgar Square. And then at half an hour's notice, you removed that. So by saying that the protest in Trafalgar Square was illegal, it wasn't illegal until you imposed this order last night. Is that not correct? I mean, people have a right to peacefully protest up until the point at which you issue this order. So you made it illegal at very short notice. Is that not correct?
No, I don't believe it is correct. So, you can quite happily say, well, the order went into place, so therefore it was done very, very quickly. Well, it has to go in at a certain time. But there were discussions in days leading up to that with Extinction Rebellion through a wide range of contacts to say, look, we need you to move from Trafalgar Square. And a good many did move from Trafalgar Square. There has to come a time when we put in place an order which makes it illegal for them to stay there any longer. And I think I would characterise our behaviour up until this point in time as completely reasonable and proportionate. I think we've been sensible throughout. We've had to clear certain parts of London and certain roads to allow London to go about its business and keep the city moving. We put forward Trafalgar Square. We facilitated that for a couple of days, but it was always made clear that you can't stay there forever, and we have never signed up to 14 days. Never. That is a view from Extinction Rebellion, which they're perfectly entitled to do, to say we're going to protest for 14 days. But we are also entitled to say, right, enough is enough. We've looked at a variety of things, and it's now time to call that to a close at Trafalgar Square. That's what we did.
Okay, so a few more short questions. I mean, this is just I've got a couple more on. Yeah, sorry.
The last one, and then we move on.
Yeah, so this is a blanket ban across the whole city. So can I just ask at what level this was signed off? Did the Commissioner, the Deputy Mayor or the Mayor know in advance? Did you ask the Home Secretary about imposing what is effectively a ban? Trafalgar Square is TfL land. Was this at the Mayor's request?
You'd have to ask the Deputy Mayor some of those questions, but just to be clear, this is an operational police decision taken by operational police officers. The person who issued the order, I believe, was DAC Lawrence Taylor. He discussed it with me earlier yesterday, and I approved the action. And I discussed it last night with the Commissioner, who was fully behind the action as well. We've been very clear as a command team over the last week that we have to give reasonable time. We have to be reasonable and sensible and continue engaging with Extinction Rebellion. But I have to go back to the issue. It's fine to say, yes, Trafalgar Square was okay, they could go there. But what was happening yesterday, I mean, over 100 people are arrested yesterday in Bank. So we can't have a situation where people are encamping in the middle of London and issuing out from there, carrying out unlawful actions and unlawful protests, breaking the law, and then going back there at night, having a meeting, and then deciding where they're going to go again the following day. That simply is not acceptable in a society governed by law. And we have to put an end to that. I think that's what we've done in a reasonable fashion within the law.
Deputy Mayor, do you...
No, you've had your say. Right.
I do have further questions.
Two more questions. A brief question from you, Assemblymember Hall, Janet Arnold, and then we move on.
Thank you. I would just like to say there are very, very many of us are very supportive of what you've done. We are very grateful because you cannot continue as it was before. Some of us wish it could have been done a lot earlier. So thank you on behalf of a great many Londoners for what you've done. Thank you.
And final comment from you, Assemblymember Arnold.
Chair, I thought I'd come to a scrutiny meeting, and it just seems to me that's what our job is to raise questions about police activity. Can I get an assurance that young people who are usually late onto the scene for whatever reason they haven't heard, but they're attracted and they're a part of this, that if they do arrive at Trafalgar Square, there's some contingency so that they won't end up arrested? Because it seems to me that there's other work that needs to be done as well, and I'm thinking especially about young people.
So I think that's a very good question. We have put out on social media, so I get your point that youngsters sometimes pick up on things late, but they also pick up on things very early through social media, earlier than many of other people do. We put out on social media what the situation is. And I don't want yourselves or the public through this medium to get the idea that there's van loads of cops waiting at Trafalgar Square to swoop on anyone who turns up. They'll simply be told, look, there's no demonstration here. This has moved on. There are no tents. You can't pitch tents. You can't put up cooking facilities. You can't put up toilet facilities. This is a public square, and it's returned to public use. And I'm sure they'll work out where they want to go after that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Chair, we must hear from the Deputy Mayor on this,
Very sorry. I mean, we spent 15 minutes on this item. We're going to spend 5 minutes. It is an important issue. That's why I allowed it to come into the agenda. Our two guests weren't actually aware that we were going to raise it. So we really got to move on. You can always write to the Commissioner. Really, with the greatest of respect, we got to move on. So can I now move on to the next item? So again, Sir House, another opening statement from you. This is about Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, about the latest PEEL assessment. PEEL, for our viewers or who may not know what PEEL stands for, is Police Effectiveness, Efficiency and Legitimacy Assessment. So, Sir House, can I ask you in your opening statement to give us your initial reactions to the latest PEEL report, and what are the top priorities from the recommendations for the Met to focus on?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've received the latest PEEL report, and as always, it's gratefully received from Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, Fire and Rescue Services. It's still fairly early days. We will reply on the or before the 6th of November to the Deputy Mayor in relation to a full action plan following up on the inspection and the recommendations, and then they will have until later that month to publish their response to our action plan. As always in HMI reports, there are some very positive things, and there are some things that we quite clearly need to work more on. The tendency is to focus on where we need to do more work, and that's perfectly understandable. I suppose we might want to look at that. I'd also like to look at the bits that we got right. So they talked about our investigative and our serious and organised crime, which was very positive. One of the areas that they said was outstanding was tackling serious and organised crime. And we're also good at preventing crime and tackling antisocial behaviour. In relation to investigating crime and protecting people, we are graded as requires improvement, which is the next grade down from good, and we acknowledge there's work we need to do there, and we'll put an action plan in place to tackle those issues. One of the areas, one of the issues that we sometimes have to engage with on HMI is that many of the recommendations and the way that they want to see an improvement is that we put more resources into a particular area. I think the Commissioner has been very clear in public that we feel we need more police officers to deal with the challenges that we face in London. So we acknowledge that we need to put more officers into more parts of the role that they carry out in different parts of the Met, different specialisations. But we need more officers to do that. We very quickly go to a situation where HMI says you need to put more officers into this place, and we say to our BCU commanders, how are you going to manage that? And their response will be, well, I have to take officers from somewhere else then. And we're immediately into a decision about resourcing and comparative priorities. And that's what we need to wrestle with as leaders of the organisation before we produce an action plan for the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. There will be questions in due course about aspects of the PEEL report. But can I now turn to you, Deputy Mayor, and ask you to make a statement on the MOPAC's annual report for 2018-19, and in doing so, if you could tell us what you consider to be MOPAC's main achievements during the last year and the key challenges for the forthcoming year.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to talk to you about the annual report for the year 18-19. It's important in terms of transparency, accountability and scrutiny for you to be able to read the report and have the opportunity to question myself and the Metropolitan Police around it. One of the things I did want to say about my role as Deputy Mayor is that it's actually unique and very, gives me absolutely unique opportunities in terms of understanding the work of the Metropolitan Police, scrutinising the work of the Metropolitan Police, but also across the criminal justice agencies, and the ability to meet and discuss, not just across the criminal justice agencies, but with communities and bereaved families and victims, what they need and how we as a criminal justice service, as well as local authorities and the boroughs of London, can fulfil what they need in terms of keeping London safe. MOPAC itself manages and holds a huge amount of responsibility. During the course of 1 year, MOPAC will oversee the work of the Metropolitan Police, which I know I don't need to remind you is the largest police service in one of the largest cities in the world. It agrees and oversees a police budget of more than £3 billion a year, and we also commission specialist services for victims across the course of the year, including over £5 million on the London Victims and Witnesses Service a year and £5 million of services for victims of sexual and domestic abuse. We also have the London Crime Prevention Fund, which has an annual gives out funds annually of nearly £17 million to boroughs to spend as they see fit within the priorities of the Police and Crime Plan on reducing crime and antisocial behaviour within their boroughs. And we maintain a city-wide network of volunteering through the Independent Custody Visitor Scheme, Safer Neighbourhood Boards and the Stop and Search Community Monitoring Groups. And we respond to, and rightly and appropriately respond to, the scrutiny of you as a committee and of Assembly members with their mayoral questions, as well as a large amount of public correspondence. I'm really pleased that during the course of this year, as with other years, we've levered in a substantial amount of extra money from the Home Office to enable us to set up and run programmes around stalking, around domestic abuse, for example. And we have set out a really ambitious agenda for improving safety in London. 2018-19 was a year of exceptional policing challenges in London and around the country. I don't need to remind you about the increase in crime, which is not just in London but nationally as well. Total recorded crime increased in London by 5.2%, but 7.7% in England and Wales. And at the same time, we have been, both police and all the partners that we work with and that our residents and our communities rely on, have continued to struggle with the absolutely crippling effects of austerity and the measures of austerity which have been driven by this government. The Mayor and I have done everything in our power over the course of this year, as we have with other years, in these difficult circumstances, to scrutinise the Met, but be a critical and supportive partner with the Metropolitan Police, as well as our communities, in the fight against crime and particularly serious violence. The annual report has much detail around the hard work around that, as well as detail around the budget. And as you know, the Mayor, over the course of last year, has invested in unprecedented amounts into the Metropolitan Police, £110 million in 2018-19, and that's enabled the Metropolitan Police to increase officer numbers as well as fund the creation of the Violent Crime Task Force, and that includes the setting up of the extra investment has also included the setting up of the Violence Reduction Unit over the course of last year, which has been driving forward the public health approach to tackling violence. And of course, there's the creation of the £45 million Young Londoners Fund, which has is part of the significant approach around public health. And in 2018-19, we have seen, and we are in no way complacent, a reduction and a stabilisation of serious youth violence incidents in London. And over the same period of last year, we saw a 16% reduction in knife crime with injury for the under-25s. But as I said, that is in no way complacent. It's a stabilisation from too high a point, and one crime is one too many. And we know and understand the scale of the huge challenge ahead of us to continue to reduce serious violence and to tackle serious violence and continue to keep that violence down. Violent crime, as you know, has been a national problem requiring national solutions, and that has been one of the key aspects of our work across the course of last year. And we are very pleased that we now have an indication from government that they understand that their cuts have gone too far, and they have made announcements about partially reversing those cuts. We've had the announcement about a number of additional officers we can recruit, but let's be clear, the additional officers of just over 1,300 is well below the 2,000 that we believe the Metropolitan Police needs for the next financial year, and we have been lobbying very hard to ask the government for 6,000 of the 20,000 additional officers that they have announced the police in the country will be getting. We will keep lobbying and pushing the government further, not just on police officer recruitment and police officer cuts and the reversing of them, but as you would expect, with the Mayor setting out the agenda around being tough on crime as well as the causes of crime, we really are lobbying very hard, as well as investing in those services that make that difference, that crucial difference to preventing crime and intervening, especially for young people, so that they don't take the wrong path. I think the annual report that's set out before you today gives you a good indication of how progress on that for the last year, and we'll continue to build on that.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. There's a lot there to take in. Our next set of questions will focus on some aspects of what you said. So can I actually bring you in, Assembly Member O'Connell?
Yes,
Better police service for London.
Okay, which you all want, of course. And thank you for that very full report back. And I'll pick up on some points around that, initially on the additional officers. So we all welcome the news of the Home Office increasing 20,000 officers, and I note your comments preceding that. We understand that the Commissioner's lobbying for pushing 5,000 to 6,000 from that tranche of 20, which of course we would be supportive. You mentioned the first tranche. My briefing is that we are going to receive funding for an additional 1,369. Does that, probably this is from the planning aspects of Steve, does that match your expectations? Are you able to plan and deploy those sort of, train up those officers in that first tranche?
I think I'd respond to that, if you don't mind, by me saying we could do more. We could train and deploy more than that,
yes,
and we would like to.
Yes. So
I don't think 1369 is enough. I understand why it's gone strictly down the formula in relation to funding. But frankly, I think all you need to do is to look at the events of the last 10 days in London to see that actually London is a case that has to be considered separately. So we were hoping for 1,500 officers at the very least. So
in the first tranche?
Yes, at least. But I would repeat what the Deputy Mayor has said. Commissioner's made it very clear, out of the 20,000, we think we should have 6,000.
I mean, you answered that question in two parts. No doubt, and we'll all agree that we would like to see more officers deployed in London. It's a question about training them up, because we all know that it takes sometimes a considerable period of time to get them through and get them on the streets. You have the capacity.
It absolutely does. It takes months to get officers recruited and onto the streets. We have got some very good people working on our recruitment. In fact, one of our senior people is advising nationally on recruitment for the rest of England and Wales. We're very confident we can recruit those numbers. In fact, the passing out parade on Friday this week is going to have very high numbers. I think nearly 400, or possibly even over 400. And for the next few intakes, will be over 400. And our normal intake to stand still is well below that. So we are growing rapidly, and we will continue to grow rapidly. We can cope with 1369. But we would like to be able to cope with more. Okay,
we'll touch upon vetting later, because that has been a challenge.
Can I just say the announcement of the 1,369 officers is not an announcement of the funding for it. It was an announcement of a target being set for recruitment. We are still yet to hear what the funding will be for the next financial year in order to enable the Metropolitan Police to recruit. We will start recruiting, but we have not yet had the funding for that. We do not know how much they are giving us per officer. We are very concerned that that will be a national figure, which will not take into account the costs of an officer in London. And we are also very concerned because we have had no indication of the longevity of this funding, about how long that funding will last. So there are still a number of questions the government need to answer in order for us to be really secure. We've had the target set, but we have not had the funding.
Okay, and thank you for that, and that is noted, and we would want to pursue that. But we would, your point, Sir Stephen, is that you would expect the Met to have a disproportionately large amount, quite rightly, of that 20,000, because London being a special case.
I would say proportionately, but yes.
Slightly more than proportionally, hopefully. I mentioned vetting, so you're enthusiastic about getting these extra officers. We still want to hear some detail about the actual funding and timings of it. But Peel was critical, Peel report was critical of vetting, because it's all well and good having these numbers of good people who want to be officers, but you have had an extreme backlog of vetting. Do you want to talk to us about that?
Yes, thanks for raising it, and we're grateful for the HMI raising it as well. It's quite clear from the brief I've had that what we are doing is prioritising the vetting of new officers and staff coming in. So we've also been recruiting quite hard on civilian staff as well. So what we're doing is prioritising brand new staff into the organisation to make sure we're taking the right people into the organisation. That has meant that we have slipped back a little bit in our re-vetting of existing staff and our awareness of staff's vetting levels. But we have reinforced the vetting unit itself, and the figures are going in the right direction now, have done since the inspection. They're improving, and we are getting through more vetting of existing staff while still prioritising new staff coming in. We have streamlined and made more efficient our vetting processes without losing any of the assurance that we need about the people that are coming in.
Because by concentrating on the new officers, there was a backlog in.
There was a slippage, but we've reinforced the vetting unit now, and it's improving across the board in terms of the figures now.
Okay, I'm going to go one more question just on the target of numbers, the overall Met target of 31,000 by the end of the financial year. Obviously, this issue has been conflated and complicated by the government welcome announcement, the Mayor's funding 18-19. Are we on, with all those factors,
yes.
Are we on target for 31,000 for the end of the financial year?
I think we are, yes. In fact, I think that I was briefed earlier this week, we'll be at 31,000. We think now before the end of the calendar year that we should be at 31,300 by the end of the financial year.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, we're welcoming new officers coming to the Met. You mentioned earlier that the priority may well be to fill specialist positions that have been gaps in that. Was that the point? Because what Londoners may expect to see is if we hear these extra officers, they may expect to see them on the streets in uniform police. Is the risk or the potential that fact is, particularly with shortage of things like detectives, etc., that will soak up those extra officers and you actually may not see them on the streets?
Right. Well, thanks for raising that, because I didn't mean to say that and mislead anyone into that thinking. So the clear focus for the new officers will be around impact. So what we are doing at the moment within the organisation, and we will be talking with the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor about it, we've already commenced, but there'll be more discussions, is what are we going to do with the extra officers that we get in? I certainly wasn't saying that we will take the HMI report and simply put the officers where the HMI has suggested we need to do it.
I wasn't literally saying
with
that,
all due respect to the HMI, it's a bigger debate than that.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that we get the right effect from the extra investment that we are getting. And much of that will be visibility on the streets. It may be through proactive visibility. It may be through more dedicated ward officers. We do have a shortage of detectives, and we do have shortages in specialist areas, particularly around domestic abuse and sexual investigations. And we'll be looking at all of those.
Okay. I mean, touching upon the BOCUs and the local officers, you just touched upon the out in the boroughs.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly my two boroughs and other people's boroughs are under number, and bad grammar, understaffed, as it were, at some considerable time. Are you saying that the BOCUs will be receiving benefit from these new officers? Because they are many are considerably under role, aren't they?
My expectation is that once we've come to a decision with this and discussed with the Mayor where the Commissioner wants to put the extra officers, the boroughs will get a significant benefit. We believe actually that they're already starting to see extra numbers arriving, but that's partially through officers funded from the Mayor's budget rather than government. There's no officers haven't started arriving from the 20,000 uplift yet, but we have seen extra officers coming in. We are recruiting hard, as I said. That's on the back of money from the Mayor.
I mean, they're being increased, but it's from a low base, because from my experience, my boroughs are particularly understaffed, which is causing pressures on officers.
I don't want to minimise that. I'm not seeking to. There is a shortage of officers. We want more officers.
Okay. Linked to that, and this is really for probably the Deputy Mayor initially, and you picked up in your very busy report about safe and able board engagement, wall panels, etc., etc., something I and others feel particularly strongly about. From the work I've done and this committee have done, is the safe and able boards aren't in a particularly healthy state at the moment. I don't want to prolong the debate for too long, but what's your take on that, Deputy Mayor?
The Safe Neighbourhood boards have had their funding protected over the last year, and they continue to get £1 million for the work that they're doing. So that has been I hope they've had confidence in that. I know there's been some issues with a couple of Safe Neighbourhood boards in London around a couple of the boroughs. MOPAC officers have been working very hard with communities and the boroughs there to try to re-establish where the Safe Neighbourhood boards where they have not been functioning as healthily as they should be, or where they have not been functioning. But overall, I would say we have across London a healthy network of safer neighbourhood boards that are well funded, have the funding that they had before and have the ability to fund community activities across London. I'm very aware that there are some particular issues in some boroughs, and we are working to put that right.
Okay, I mean, I welcome the funding that comes to the Safe Neighbourhood Boards, but that in itself is not a measure of successful boards, because you can give them the 25,000, but if they're not meeting and they're not performing that function, that doesn't make them healthy. So my last point, Chair, really is connected to that, an issue around confidence and satisfaction. Over some considerable time, probably as long as I've been doing this, I've tried to make it clear that they're two separate measures. Okay, so satisfaction, we all know, is the experience of a Londoner after dealing with the police. Confidence is a different measure altogether. And when I've always been asked about confidence, I've always said, well, the Met's confidence isn't very good, but it tends to bumble along about mid-60s. Well, the last figures I've got is dropped right down to possibly below 60% on confidence, and equally victim satisfaction is in decline. That is in small part linked to that previous conversation about boards and engagement. Do either of you, both of you perhaps, want to comment on the reduction in confidence and satisfaction? Either.
I'm happy to go first. So I think I agree with your analysis that they are two separate things. Confidence is a very, very difficult thing to influence. And I think we've been talking for a number of years about policing numbers and budgets and austerity and cuts. And inevitably, that has an impact through the media and through direct engagement with the public. They start to feel, well, that's bad. And it sometimes isn't reflecting their reality. Mm-hmm. It's very similar to the story I keep hearing, which I believe, people say, what do you think of the NHS? Not very much. What do you think of your local hospital? It's pretty good. What do you think of your local doctor? Very good. What about the nurses? Brilliant. The closer it gets to them and their experience, the more positive. But they have a negative feeling because of media and general take on things. I don't think it's that different with the police service in general. I'm hoping, and we believe confidently, that the investment of extra funding from both the Mayor and from government, both very welcome, will start to turn that debate, and they will start to see a more positive view from the public. It will be interesting to see in our local analysis if the new Met documentary that's out, the third episode I think is this week, if that produces a bump, because it can do. It certainly gives us a bump in recruitment. And it's that engagement issue through the media that's a difficult one for us to always manage. Satisfaction, I think you're quite right, is far more in our hands, and we need to act as professional, caring organisations so that people are more satisfied with us. We need to look at how we deal with the victims of crime. I've spoken with roomfuls of officers who work in the telephone and digital investigation unit who take an awful lot of the crime reports coming in from the public now. And they are a very motivated group of people. We've given them a lot of training in how to manage talking to the public, to give them realistic expectations, to try and meet their expectations and meet their needs on the phone. And we're starting to see satisfaction levels there improve, but they're still coming from a too low a base, and we need to do more about that.
And the 101 service, that has been a cause of dissatisfaction?
Well, I think here the Met does tend to buck a trend a little bit. So we've been talking to chief constables around England and Wales who've been saying actually they're thinking the 101 system isn't serving their needs. Actually our figures in comparison are pretty good, and they're going in the right direction, as are our emergency call numbers. We're satisfied with that, and I would pay tribute to the people in Lambeth and Bow and Hendon who answer those calls 24 hours a day and do a great job doing it.
Okay, lastly, my last question back to you is supplementary to that. Is I assume that you're holding your new BOCU commanders and have an expectation of those commanders and their team that they support safe neighbourhood boards and proactively engagement throughout the boroughs, whilst I understand they are quite thinly spread at that level of command. But that is your expectation?
Yes, we expect full engagement with all community aspects from the BOCU commanders. It's part of their role.
Did you want to add to that, Deputy Mayor?
You're right to pick up. You are right to pick up on the issues of victim satisfaction and confidence, and it's something that, as Deputy Commissioner's already talked about, we have spent a lot of time scrutinising and working with the Metropolitan Police around. The London's Victims Commissioner Claire Waxman has been working particularly closely around victim satisfaction. there are a number of things that drive that around getting, being there when needed, getting it right first time, information. All of these we all agree have to improve, and there is a real drive within the Met to do, to improve that. But you are right to look at that and to think that there are some issues here and concerns, and that's what we have been picking up throughout the year.
Okay, thank you.
Assembly Member Mitchell, and followed by Assembly Member Hall, and then I'll come to you, Assembly Member Page.
So Stephen, when it comes to the new officers, which is very good news to hear you're going to be getting over the coming years, I just wondered whether the speed with which they can be effective is going to be affected by this ruling that all new police officers should be graduates.
So that's a fundamental change in police recruiting. You're obviously aware of. I mean, it's the biggest change that I remember in terms of recruiting for police officers. I need to be clear, it doesn't say all new recruits have to have a degree, and it's very important that we put that message out, because that seems to be the general view. It's not true.
It's not true.
It's not true.
Okay.
You can join in a number of ways, and our plan is to move forward with a slightly, not unusually for London, we think the Met is slightly different and has different needs, and Londoners have different needs. So we're moving forward with a slightly hybrid model, which will mean that we will welcome people with degrees, and a high percentage of our current recruits have degrees already when they join. But you don't have to have a degree to join the Metropolitan Police Service. And we will phase that in due course, because what we're saying is you can join without a degree, but you sign up to a course of study which will get you to degree level in due course. So it's very important that people realise you don't have to have a degree to join, and we don't want to see people looking at the application online thinking, well, I haven't got a degree so I can't join the Met. You absolutely can join the Metropolitan Police Service without a degree. We welcome people with all backgrounds, with all educational attainments. What we would want them to do is to be able to meet our standards, and in due course, not straight away, we will offer an ability for them to sign up, to take a degree, to get a degree within the organisation, which is a great offer, of course, because at the end of the day, they're being paid as police officers, they're doing a job, and they'll get a degree at the end of it. But we want to make sure we attract people from all parts of society with all educational attainments, and we're very keen that we don't turn it into you can only get in with a degree. You can join the Metropolitan Police today and in the future without a degree.
That's reassuring, although I would say, therefore, there's sort of maybe the way it's presented should be clearer, because there have been police forces around the country who've actually protested about this. I mean, I think Lincoln Police Force said this was a terrible idea. It would effectively take new officers out of service, as it were, for 1 day a week while they're doing this degree thing.
Yeah.
So it's not just misapprehension on my part. It seems that it's in the police too.
Well, yeah, I wasn't criticising you at all. I mean, you're quite right. A number of chiefs, particularly, I know the Lincolnshire chief has got a particular view on it. It's not a view that the mainstream chief constables necessarily agree with. We have looked at the abstraction levels for training. I think we have to recognise policing is becoming more complex. We're asking officers to deal, even with the most simple crime, there will be digital material involved in many of them. We're expecting high standards. We want to improve customer satisfaction. So we want to make sure that the officers who join are properly equipped for what is a fast-changing, fast-paced role in society. So I think it's right that we look at the standards of training that we give to our officers, but that's not the same as saying you have to have an academic degree to join. And most chiefs that I've spoken with around the country are very, very clear. We welcome graduates, and as I say, we have a high percentage of graduates now, but you can join the Metropolitan Police, and I think you'll be able to join all forces without a degree. You may, in some forces, have to proceed straight away to work towards a degree, but the Met's going to do it slightly differently, and they're going to be effectively 3 ways in. 1, you join with a degree. 2, you join and you sign up to take a degree. And 3, you join in the current way right now, because we want to make sure we don't put anyone off.
Thank you. Well, please make sure that that's clear in your recruitment, and ads and everything. Thank you.
Can you tell me, Sir Stephen, how many vacancies are you actually running with at the moment?
I can't give you that exact. I wouldn't want to mislead you, so I can't give you that figure. Do you mean across the whole organisation or a particular area?
Yes. Well, I'll tell you the thing.
Sure.
And last year it happened as well. We were being told that there was under 30,000 police, etc., etc. Constant complaints about that, and at that level I agree. But there was funding in place for more police officers. So the fact that there weren't police officers in place where there was funding for them is a failure not of government or whatever funding them, it's the fact that you haven't recruited to those posts.
That's not a picture I recognise, I have to say. So, I mean, I've
well,
been
it's the figures.
Well, I've been back in the Met for 18 months, and we've been recruiting pretty hard for all of those times. Certainly right now we are recruiting as hard as I ever remember the Met recruiting. I think we're getting over 400 people in intake on Friday. We are filling up on BCUs and putting more and more officers out there. So
yes, I
it's
know
a complicated picture,
it
and that we do have vacancies in some places, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're not.
No, by the
recruiting
figures
properly.
at one point there was from recollection well over 900, I believe 975 less than there was funding for them, and that was last year. I know you're recruiting now. I know lots of people that are working within that, and it is working well now. But you were all complaining a year ago that there weren't enough police officers, but there was far more money in the pot for police officers than you were recruiting. So therefore, you're working from a low base because you weren't recruiting properly a year ago, which I have mentioned before.
Okay, well, I hear what you're saying. I don't accept it, but I hear what you're saying.
Okay, well, we'll get the figures maybe,
Sure,
and we'll
okay.
look at it again. The figures are out there. These are all from your figures.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I just wanted to pick up a point. You said, Sir Stephen, that you could train and deploy more officers, but I know it is very complex and the volumes you're talking about. But I've been asking a few mayor's questions because I understand that the first stage assessment of candidates for police constable is done by civilians, and these people are hired through an agency. And I'd had raised with me some serious concerns about the agency, assessors having difficulty getting paid. The agency's been trying to increase the number of candidates that the assessors see from 24 to 96. And, you know, the complexity every day of trying to get through that number of assessments. I'm just wondering what scrutiny, perhaps both the Deputy Mayor and yourselves are doing to make sure that this agency is functioning properly. I'd had a mayoral answer in September where you seem to just say it's all fine and rosy, but I just want to know how you're interrogating that to make sure that the process is smooth and that this agency is acting properly on your behalf.
Well, I can answer you in part in figures, if I might. So our target for September recruitment was 310. We actually ended up recruiting 421 officers. Our October target was 400. We're looking at a projection of 461. In November, our target is 446. We're looking at a projection of 547. So the numbers within the pipeline to bring into the organisation are, I think it's fair to say, extremely healthy. So I haven't heard, to my recollection, what you said. I haven't heard that before. I can certainly have it looked at. If it's acting as a brake on recruitment, then it shouldn't be. And we'll welcome even more numbers in. But the numbers we're getting in are pretty healthy. And I have regular meetings with Claire Davis, the HR director, and we focus very strongly at management board level on the recruiting numbers and the processes. We've done a lot to streamline the process, to make it more efficient, to try to make sure it is as reflective of London as possible. So we run events to keep recruits warm, in other words, to keep their interests up, particularly aimed at black and minority ethnic candidates, because we know that we've got a challenge there. So I think actually it's quite a vibrant area, an awful lot of work going on, as you would expect with the money that we hope is coming from the government and the extra officers. We're very keen to make sure that we are recruiting as efficiently as we possibly can, and we know that we can recruit more officers than we've been offered so far. So I'm pretty confident the system works well. but I'm not overconfident, I'm not complacent. I'm happy to take away your comments and get them looked at and come back to you.
Would you and the Deputy Mayor just look at that to assure yourselves? Because I mean, obviously
Yeah,
I've had
but
it reported to me.
I mean, I've seen your
concerns.
mayoral questions
Yes.
on this, and if you have got, you know, cases of this happening, it'd be really useful to know in terms of the scrutiny that I undertake, as very similar to probably the Deputy Commissioner does as well. I have regular meetings with Robin Wilkinson and Claire Davis on this, regularly scrutinise the figures, and we scrutinise very carefully that pipeline of recruits, assessment, and where people fall out and what is happening. And I myself have been down to SSCL, who are contractors on this, to talk to them face to face about their ability to deliver on this recruitment. And they have assured me that they, and I can see it through the figures, that they are recruiting and they are getting people through the system, and we are getting the numbers that we need.
Well, it sounds like the figures, as you say, have really gone up. Which I've had raised with me that assessors are having difficulties getting paid, getting their ID card. That potentially, if you've got to scale up more, could delay it. So perhaps you could just let me know on that. I'd be grateful.
Getting an ID card could be a vetting issue.
Yes. Yes, of course. Thank you.
Susan, could I bring you in?
Back to the
Going back to the question.
Yeah, my two favourite areas, which are tasers and spit guards. So if we can start with tasers, Deputy Commissioner, how will the ring-fenced funding announced from the Home Office for equipping police officers with tasers benefit the Met and its plans to extend the number of officers who can carry and use tasers?
So we acknowledge the ring fencing money, and obviously all funding is welcome. The Management Board had already, pretty much in the same time scale actually, had a meeting and decided to initiate a further uplift of tasers. And there has been publicity on this, and the Commissioner's been talking about it in public. So at the moment we have just over 6,000 officers trained on taser usage. And if I just give a comparison, at the moment, I think sort of the figures for West Midlands and Greater Manchester Police are around about 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 officers trained with tasers, just to give a comparable figure. But we decided that we wanted to increase the number of officers trained to use tasers, and so we've decided to uplift that number to 10,000 officers over the next 2 to 3 years, and obviously the government funding will be part of that uplift calculation. What we want to do is to make sure that there are enough taser-equipped officers on duty so that there is a very quick availability of tasers to officers who need them.
Is it correct that during the August thing in the street, what do they call it? The Notting Hill Carnival, that there weren't enough tasers to go around for all the officers that could use tasers?
Not as far as I'm aware.
Okay. Will every officer that wants to use a taser eventually be allowed to use one in London?
No.
Okay. Comparing the Met with other forces isn't actually easily comparable because the numbers are so different. Why would you think that if an officer wants to carry a taser and they're capable of using one, what is the reason for not allowing all officers that want one that are capable of having one?
So to be clear, it's just to bust this myth. My comment, sorry if it was a little abrupt, is basically
That's
to
all right,
bust the
I don't
myth that officers can queue up for a taser and be handed them.
No, I absolutely.
I know you don't know
some of
that.
the trainers.
Yeah, I know you know that, but there is it's important that the public realise that we don't operate that way. So there is a taser training course. Yes. That you have to pass, and the failure rate, there is a failure rate at it. It's a difficult course. In fact, the Commissioner went to see it last week, to see it operating. So we say that if you are in a post that is nominated or designated as a taser post, then you go on the course, and if you pass the course, you will get a taser. At the moment, we are saying that we are focusing on emergency response officers to have tasers, territorial support group officers, firearms officers, and a number of other areas. We're increasing that to more roads policing officers, to dog section officers as well. They operate on their own a lot, and pan London. So this is the availability argument that we believe in. We are still in discussion in Management Board about the issuing of tasers to dedicated ward officers. And the Commissioner has made clear that she thinks it is an appropriate decision point to think about maturely in terms of not everyone in London is comfortable with taser issuing and usage by officers. Some members of the community have understandable concerns about use of force, and we have to issue tasers in a consensual way with the support of the public and with the support of a broad range of political views as well, because there is a public confidence issue here as well. There's an officer safety issue, and most importantly a public safety issue, which means we have to have tasers very readily available within London. But because of the density of the population and the density of policing, we believe that doesn't mean that every single officer needs to have a taser at this moment in time. But we will always keep it under review.
I think the important point of it that on 80% of the times that they're actually drawn, they de-escalate situations.
Yes, absolutely.
And to me, the safety of a police officer comes as absolute paramount. But I'm sure we will go back to that argument constantly. Now on to spit guards. You will recall, you and I had quite a few conversations on spit guards. Yeah. Now they have been agreed, or they were agreed about 6 months ago. I've been told by the Mayor at one of the question times that they're not actually been issued out yet to frontline officers. Is that correct?
No.
So they're used on the front line as well as in custody?
So the way we're doing it is we're requiring officers to go through training to apply the spit guards safely. So it's now incorporated into officer safety training. So when officers rotate through their next officer safety training course, they will get an input on spit guards, and once they've had that, they'll be issued.
And the age
if they are in, just to clarify, if they're in a role, if they're in an operational deployed role. So we're not issuing them to all officers. So I won't be issued with one. Detectives probably won't be issued with them, but response officers and others who are engaging with the public on a daily basis will get them once they've been trained.
We'll get them. How many are out there at the moment? Because every police officer I've asked, and I stop police officers in the street and talk to them, nobody, we all do odd things, but none of them so far are even aware that they're getting them. And in actual fact, I've been argued with by some saying, no, they're only used in custody.
Well, that's not true. They are being issued, and they're being issued on the back of officer safety training courses.
So how many would you say are out
I don't have that
50%,
figure.
20%?
I just wouldn't want to commit. I'll need to find out and come back to you.
Perhaps you'll let us know, because the Mayor seems to think they weren't going to go out until next year sometime.
Well, the experience I have with it is a TSG officer who said to me that she just joined and she hadn't got it, and she'd had some distressing experiences with spit guards in the past. And when I contacted her again a couple of weeks later, she'd been on her officer safety training and she had a spit guard.
Well, that's good news. Apparently the data shows that they've been proportionately used more on females. Is there any reason for that?
I don't know.
Are women more likely to spit or bite than men? It's a genuine, I have no idea question.
I have no operational or research figures to back that up whatsoever. You obviously do. So
No, I don't. I'm asking the question.
I've no
But
reason.
it's written down, the evidence is there. I'm just wondering if you...
So the use of spit guard is a use of force, and these figures will be publicly available on the Met's website.
Yeah.
So
I'm just wondering if you had any idea whether there was any reason behind that.
No.
Okay. Can you tell me how many police in the last year have been treated for any sort of disease that have resulted from a bite or spit from somebody that they've been...
Not from the briefing I've had here, no, but I can certainly write to you about it.
That would be really helpful.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Right, I'm conscious of the time, and we could spend the whole morning just talking about the issues raised by the Peel report and MOPAC, but I've got to put this question to you, Deputy Commissioner. This is about officers' welfare, and one of the findings from the Peel report was that forces are providing more well-being services. However, the Inspectorate felt that the workforce does not always feel the benefits. And to put that in focus, there was a news item on BBC Breakfast News this morning. There was an inspector from Greater Manchester Police who had brought some cards along from a young person thanking the police for their response to the incident at the Arndale Centre.
Yes.
It's quite actually moving. But the inspector made a number of points. He was just a manager sitting behind a desk. It was the frontline officers who who don't get bonuses or company cars, but he also mentioned about the morale in the force. And that's been well documented elsewhere. So, I mean, what have you got to say about this particular aspect? Because we often forget the welfare of officers as well. And the committee is here to look at a number of things, including how officers feel. So your views about the Peel assessment and what's being done within the Met?
So I think the Peel assessment pays tribute to the direction that the Commissioner has set in terms of trying to make sure that the officers are well equipped and well led and well supported. Met direction, which is the Commissioner's strategy for the 5 years, makes it very clear in one of the 7 pillars of that strategy that we are focusing on taking care of our people, our officers and our staff. We've put a lot more money into a wellbeing offer, and if you go onto the internal Met website, there are numerous ways for all members of the organisation to access services around physical health, mental well-being, to get help if they need it as soon as possible. That's also available for supervisors in an extra package so that they can spot if any of their officers or staff need any extra assistance, and the supervisors can access that, which maybe goes to your question about the inspector in GMP and the officers who dealt with that traumatic situation. After we have a traumatic incident, we run a structured debrief, and at that we can try to identify if any of the people involved in it have any need of welfare assistance in terms of mental health, or just need to talk about it to a counsellor. That's available over the phone, or it's also for more serious need available in person. As I say, we put a lot of extra money and a lot of extra thought into the delivery of welfare services to our staff, because we recognise, I think partly brought on by the traumatic incidents in 2017, the terrorist attacks and the Grenfell Tower disaster, that I suppose we've always known it, but that brought home the sheer trauma and difficulty that people suffer going through such difficult incidents. They can deal with it at the time, but afterwards it starts to have an impact. So there's a lot in place now. I'm sure we can always do more on it, and we will continue to focus on it because the Commissioner is determined that we look after our people as best we possibly can.
Thank you. And finally, Deputy Mayor, if I could ask you this. You've already been asked about MOPAC's approach to community engagement, but I'm going to put this to you. Because tonight we are meeting John Shapiro, the chair of the London Communities Policing Partnership, and amongst other points that he made to MOPAC in correspondence last year, correspondence that I must say that MOPAC were incredibly slow in replying to, because we were copied into it. In fact, I think it took, if I'm right, months before a reply even went. And the list of concerns expressed were delays in receiving SNB funding monies. I think we addressed that already, but insufficient support from MOPAC to assist problems faced by SNBs, a lack of response to general inquiries or questions concerning administration and process, and no public acknowledgement or promotion of the role of SNB chairs. John also made the point that he, along with others, they're all volunteers in this job. I mean, I personally know, because he lives in Tower Hamlets, which I represent, the amount of time and dedication he devotes to that particular SNB. And the reason I raise it formally is that we are meeting John and his team tonight, and it would be good to get a message from you to that meeting. I think MOPAC are at the meeting, but...
So I absolutely, I mean, I used to attend the Safe Neighbourhood Board in Hackney. I totally understand, and we're grateful for the volunteering that takes place through the Safe Neighbourhood Boards, really committed people who are committed to their communities and engaging with their communities. And as I said earlier, I do know that there is a variance and variability in how well the Safe Neighbourhood Boards are working and functioning in London. I do think, and I will look back at this, given that you've raised it, and I know that it's been raised by John Shapiro as well, around the level of support. My understanding is that there's been quite a lot of work in the boroughs where there has been particular issues around Safe Neighbourhood Boards, a lot of work from officers to try to support and to get those Safe Neighbourhood Boards up and running again. I know there's been some delays with the funding. We are pushing that through and progressing on that, and I believe the interim chief executive of MOPAC is meeting, it might be the meeting that you're referring to this evening, or is meeting the John Shapiro very soon around that. I will double check that, because I've seen the letter that has come through, and we are looking into that as quickly as we can. But I would also, just as safer neighbourhood boards are one part of the infrastructure around community engagement, it is not the only way that we do community engagement or that we understand what Londoners are thinking and Londoners want out of their police service. They're an important part, but they are not the only part.
And my only addition to that is the form for applying for the funds that you're...
I know, I've heard
is
those.
30 pages.
I know, we are looking at that.
It's about 500 quid a page
Grand
or something.
page.
So if you could look at that, that would be...
It has been looked at, and I know that was a specific complaint, and
these are
looks like a
volunteers.
I understand that.
Thank you.
Well,
I've
I think I'll
seen
take
that.
the message back to tonight's meeting. We are there in time, but I'll now hand over to Assemblymember Arnold to take us forward, tackling violence against women and girls.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Sir Stephen.
Good morning.
The HMIC FRS made observations and recommendations on the Met on domestic abuse in its recent Peel assessment, and I'm just going to pick up two of those and see if you can help us. That the Met's domestic abuse rate is higher, so congratulations on that, than the England and Wales average. But its use of voluntary attendance at police station when a suspect is interviewed but is not under arrest is almost double that of the England and Wales average. It recommends that the Met review why this is happening to ensure that it does not put victims at risk. Will you be looking into this recommendation with a view to accepting it,
Yes.
given the risk to victims and the persistent rates of offender activities in this area?
The answer is yes, we will. I'm not content with the figures as they are. I think the HMI is quite right to raise it as a concern. I've asked for some work to be done looking at our releasing under investigation and our bailing of domestic violence suspects. I'm concerned that we may be not using the full power of the law to protect victims, more often than not statistically women.
Yeah.
So that does bother me. I am pleased that there is a deal of work going on in the domestic abuse area. So there's a group being led by Commander Baz Javid, who's looking at improving our performance across the board on domestic abuse, looking at our arrest rate, because I think that should be higher. This is the initial attendance. And I think we all know that a great many victims of domestic abuse pull away from the prosecution because they don't have confidence. It takes too long. They don't feel that they're getting the support, it's been taken as seriously as it should be, or they come under threat by the offender in the first place because of the domestic circumstances, which is why I think the bail issue and RUI issue is an important one. But our initial arrest rate is not as high as it could be, which tells me that we need to look more carefully at what action our officers are taking at the scene. I think often that is masked by the fact, though, that the offender may have left. Therefore, the initial arrest is not possible. So what we need to do is make sure that in the next 72 hours, preferably the next 24, but the next 72 hours, there is relentless follow-up on that case and that the offender is identified and arrested. And I think we should be using the caution +3 approach, which is what you talked about, bringing someone in not under arrest. You will, of course, appreciate, though, that the code G of PACE tells us that we can only arrest somebody if it is necessary. Now, as with much in life, it's about interpretation. And I wonder if our interpretation is as other forces are, because our figures are so out of kilter with other forces. And we acknowledge that we probably need to look at that again and say, actually, in many instances, an arrest is necessary and should be carried out.
Yeah, thank you for that. The other area that popped up for me was that they said that the Met needs to use its powers more effectively to protect victims of domestic violence and review its use of DVPOs, that's domestic violence protection orders, domestic violence protection order notices in Clare's law.
Yes.
And it also recommended that the Met collect feedback from vulnerable victims of domestic abuse to improve its service. So first half is shouldn't you be using your powers? But I think you answered that really in the first half by saying you're not satisfied really, you want more done.
Yes, so on the domestic violence protection orders, we're actually I think tomorrow, might be today or tomorrow, we're running a training day at Scotland Yard to disseminate best practice from our central domestic abuse team, who hold the best practice, to the lead officers on each of the BCUs in relation to domestic abuse, and also to local judiciary. So sort of a joint training session looking at streamlining the process and driving better usage of the orders to try and protect victims a bit better. October is seeing the hard launch of the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, Clare's Law, to make it clearer to victims their rights and to help them be better informed, and also to make sure our officers understand how we can assist victims to improve their knowledge of their situation and protect themselves. And yes, I see the thing on the Victims' Voice Forum as well, and the aim is to create a group to give us feedback to shape our approach on domestic abuse. I think the summary is that there's a lot of work to do, but people are working very, very hard. Officers do work very hard to try and protect victims. I think we need to look at some of our interpretation of legislation in relation to this to do more and to do better on it.
I recall when I was a member of the old body, the MPA, there was a very close working with victim support. In fact, it was really quite tight because the then commissioner was committed to that organisation. Is that relationship still as tight? Because they really would have the evidence about feedback, wouldn't they? Because they've got a better, I would say they could develop a better relationship with vulnerable individuals.
I'm not sure.
Well, yes, our relationship with victim support is very close.
When you say yours, you could be talking MOPACs. I was wondering about the service, because there's two perspectives here, isn't there?
I don't know that it's not good and tight. I haven't got evidence to the contrary. I would expect it to be positive and strong, particularly because I think we rely on victim support to do what it says, to protect and support the victim. I would like to see us, this isn't a surprise, I would like to see us being more intrusive and more action focused at the start of the incident, i.e. to make arrests where that's an appropriate thing to do, to follow through relentlessly, and to make sure that the victim is protected and make sure that the right agencies are engaged with the victim to protect them, and make sure the criminal justice system, where appropriate, is engaged with the offender to deal with the offender.
Thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions for the DMPC. The Mayor measures progress on domestic abuse by looking to reduce the rates of attrition in cases of violence against women and girls as they pass through the criminal justice process. Deputy, just remind us, what was the benchmark that you started with, and what are the current levels of attrition that you have secured with the work that you're doing in this area?
I don't have the figures in front of me for the specific levels of attrition around domestic abuse, and I can obviously get back to you on that. But there has been a lot of work around, particularly around one of the things I wanted to say. Claire Waxman, as the Independent London Victims Commissioner, has done a lot of work in looking at and engaging and consulting with victims about their experience across the criminal justice service, which obviously includes a large part of the Metropolitan Police. And I think it is a slightly false distinction between the Met and MOPAC and our work on victims, because we work very closely with the Met in feeding in the views and the experiences, the lived experiences of victims, whether that be victims of and survivors of domestic abuse or sexual violence as well. And we know there is a real problem, and the Deputy Commissioner has been very clear, a real problem around the number of detections and sanction detections and convictions for women around violence against women, for issues around domestic abuse and rape. There is a real problem here, and there is a lot of work that's being taken, being maintained.
Can I just stop you there, because my question was quite specific. The Mayor has said he wants to measure progress.
Yep.
Are you saying you're not in the space to actually give that measurement because it's too early?
No, I'm saying I haven't got that in front of me.
You haven't got it in
Yeah,
front of
that's
it.
what I'm
Well,
saying.
can we have that?
Yeah,
because
that's
that is
absolutely.
that's I do make a distinction between MOPAC, your job, the mayor's job, and the police, and I'm just wanting to know that the mayor's promises that he's made are being delivered. So I'd look forward to seeing that information.
Of course.
Can I just ask you a couple of questions as well about your funding? The funding of youth IDVAs in major trauma centres. I mean, this is absolutely marvellous, and my colleague, Assembly Member Pigeon, I know for at least 10 years, or as long as the first project started, has been wanting to bring this into London. And also that recognises the key intersection between gang lifestyle and violence against women and girls. So can you tell us anything about this work? Is it delivering as expected, or do you need to get back to us about that?
So the youth workers in accident emergency units and trauma centres, you might have seen that the Mayor made an announcement yesterday, and I was in North Middlesex Hospital with him around an uplift in funding for that, which will increase the number of youth workers in some accident emergency units and in the trauma centres, but also increase the number of accident emergency units that have those youth workers. And part of that is around picking up young women and girls who are victims of violence, sexual violence or domestic abuse. The work that they're doing is incredibly important. When I was speaking to the practitioners, youth workers and clinicians in the North Middlesex Hospital yesterday, they told me that they had 3 youth workers being out doing this work. Through the Mayor's funding, they will now have 5 youth workers, and it enables them to really focus on the problems of their area, and then that they are picking up young women and girls. And they described the work that they're doing as life-changing and life-saving, and that is what we are seeing coming through the work, not just in North Middlesex, but we will see through the 5 extra accident emergency units the money's been rolled out to, and the increase in capacity in the major trauma centres as well.
Well, good. That's good to hear, because that really matches what we heard from victims from, I don't know whether you had the statements from
Red Thread.
At Red Thread
yes,
event,
I did. It's fantastic.
That was sponsored by
good.
Caroline, and you could not want that work to be expanded when you heard about how that had changed lives. Mm-hmm. So that's good to hear. And then lastly, just another one about, we know that housing is so important, because anybody who's worked in this area knows that what victims are always looking for is an opportunity to start again, mm-hmm. or to move away from current behaviours that they have. So will you be continuing or improving the funding of the Pan-London Housing Reciprocal programme?
We will absolutely be sustaining the funding of the Pan-London Housing Reciprocal programme. I have met them. There was an event with them, I think, last week around domestic abuse services and that programme. It is incredibly important in terms of being able to move women and families out of dangerous and difficult situations, or move them out of refuges as well. And it is not just obviously the women, important though that is, it is also picking up other young people and families who are at risk, whether that be from gang violence or whatever violence it is. And we will look at, I mean, there's always going to be, the problem with the reciprocal is that there is always going to be a mismatch between demand and the resources that we're able to put in, and we get back to the fundamental issue that there is not enough housing in London to be able to easily move those people who are really at need of being moved.
Thank you. And then the last question is, are you satisfied that action taken by MOPAC is looking at the other wider issues? Absolutely, we have to stay with violence, but there's the financial and cohesive control that can go on for years, and can end up with, if you like, the victim responding and then being charged for murder in some cases. Is MOPAC, can you assure us that MOPAC has these other areas on their agenda, in the same way that they do violence against women and girls?
I don't see it as there should not be a distinction between violence against women and girls, whether it be physical, mental, coercive or financial. For me, it is all part of that spectrum, and our violence against women and girls strategy not just acknowledges that, but views that as part of the spectrum. So absolutely the strategy picks that up. I think there is more work to be done, however, in terms of training and understanding around coercive control and what that means. I had a really good meeting recently with a academic at Southbank University around the use of mobile technology and coercive control, and we are looking about what we can do to work with her around some of the training needs, not just for the police but for probation officers or those that are dealing with perpetrators as well. So it's part of the spectrum, but I think it is an area where we do have to make sure that we are keeping up with the different ways of perpetrating violence against women and girls, and coercive control is absolutely one of those areas.
Well, thank you. As someone who in 2000, along with colleagues, put this matter on the agenda, I commend the work that we've heard about today and the work that's ongoing. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Deputy Mayor, sorry, while we're talking about violence against women and girls, a couple of times, 2 or 3 times over the past few years, I've asked you about rape statistics. I know this is not exactly domestic abuse as such, but would it be possible for you to give me an update on what those statistics are looking like now? Because you know that there was a point at which there was a real increase, a very alarming increase, but I think we're talking about a year ago now.
We did do a piece of work around beneath the numbers, around trying to get underneath why were we seeing an increase in rape, a substantial increase in rape, or were we seeing a difference in either confidence to come forward or reporting? And as you know, that piece of research showed that it's obviously, as usual, it's complex, but one of the issues was that there has been, and this is to the Met's, to their credit, that actually the way that they report and they record